Written by Susan Mutter and premiered by Kenneth Tompkins of the Detroit Symphony in 2008, Ages gives us glimpses into a man's life at 5 different ages. The composer says the piece was inspired by her father, and she writes in the program notes that the idea is to explore how a person relates to their life and sees the world in different seasons of their life. We do have a wonderful advantage in this work because the composer tells us exactly what it is meant for us to portray in each of the 5 movements and the 5 different ages of the person's life. You don't always have this, so take advantage of that and really pay attention to what the composer was trying to portray. In the first movement, we are 6 years old, and we are aimlessly wandering around the neighborhood and sort of interacting with whatever we might find. The music needs to feel innocent and a little distracted and able to change at a moment's notice. When I play this, I try to use sort of a light or thin tone color, and I also try to stay on the front side of the beat so that it never feels weighed down or too serious, because after all, we are 6 years old. In the second movement, things are quite different because now we are 15 years old and we are a rebellious teenager. We want to have things our way, but also we have that amazing energy and enthusiasm, and we want to go out and conquer the world and make a difference. I personally approach the opening section of this movement with as much dissonance and musical eye-rolling as I can. The piano starts with a big, powerful D-flat major chord, and the trombone comes in with a G natural, which is probably the most dissonant note that you can play in the key of D-flat major. So I lean into that, and I almost want to seem like I'm arguing with the piano player, almost like a teenager might argue with their parents. Eventually, though, the piece starts to run wild and free, and I try to imagine those times when, as a teenager, you feel that optimism of your whole life is ahead of you, and you have that true belief that you can go out and change the world. And the tempo of the piece continues to move forward and forward and forward and faster. And so it's important that you work with your collaborator to make sure that all of those tempo transitions and accelerandos are seamless. The third movement, 34, is about monotony. Our character is stuck in a repetitive job that is just relentless. And so we hear that in the music with repeated rhythms and a lot of the same notes in the melody. There is a section in the middle where our character gets to go spend some time with their 3-year-old daughter, and it's just the very best part of the day, and then it's right back to the grind. In most pieces that we play with trombonists, my advice is always think about where is the line going and where does it grow and where does it come back and what are the peaks and valleys. But in this particular piece, because the very point of it is monotony, I try very hard to keep the line at the same static level of dynamic and the same vibe throughout those repetitive phrases. I want it to feel like you're stuck in a job that is slowly crushing your spirit. I also personally choose a breathing plan that really stretches me to my limits and makes me almost out of breath at the end of those long phrases. I do that on purpose so that it makes me almost sound exhausted and like I've just finished a long day at work. I would not really recommend that for any other piece in the repertoire, but for this piece, I think it's an important part of playing that character. The composer tells us that the fourth movement, 66, is probably the most satisfying time of our character's journey. We're talking about feelings of reflection, contentment, love, and grandchildren. This beautiful melody was actually what initially hooked me into this piece in the first place, and for me, it's all about savoring the moment, not rushing through it, and letting those high phrases really sing out. I think as you're letting those high phrases sing out, it's important that we don't get too thin, and that also that we don't get too big or screamy, right? It's the kind of phrase that has nothing left to prove and is just content with where you are. I also try as best I can to use a warm tone and my warmest vibrato so that it reflects that contentment that this person is feeling at age 66. The final movement, 92, is definitely tinged with sadness, and it's not uncommon to see audience members getting emotional as you perform this. Our character is near the end of their life, maybe in a hospital bed, and we hear those repeated single notes in the piano that are meant to symbolize the morphine drip that is keeping the pain at bay. As we drift in and out of consciousness, those memories of childhood come back, and we hear the theme from the first movement, age 6, come back and grow to the point that we can almost believe that we're fully back there, and then suddenly we're snapped back to reality as the life drains from our character and he fades away. Obviously, this is heavy material, and I realize it can sometimes be difficult to put yourself into that character emotionally as we get towards these later movements. If you are maybe a young student working on this and you haven't lived a lot of life and you haven't had some of these experiences that happen at these older ages, that's okay. This gives you an opportunity to practice being a good actor, essentially, exercising your empathy muscles and imagining what it would be like to be 34 or 66 or 92. The first time I performed this piece, I happened to be 34. And so those first 3 movements, it was not difficult for me to imagine what it's like because I had actually lived those seasons of my own life. But I had to imagine and essentially be a good actor for those later stages. This is a really important skill for musicians to be able to develop because we are constantly asked to inhabit characters in our music that have different experiences than we have personally had. This is why empathy is a really important emotional skill to have, and it's why I'm very grateful to have pieces like this that ask me to stretch myself and put myself into a character's shoes. You may have to work a little harder to put yourself into the character's shoes, especially during those ages that you have not yet personally experienced. You may have to spend some time with people who have been through those seasons of life. Speak to some 66-year-olds, speak to some 92-year-olds, and get them to tell you what is it like to be in that season of life. I know that sometimes that work can be difficult to do, but I'm so grateful that this piece provides a really wonderful payoff and a wonderful reward for doing that difficult work. Ultimately, it provides a rich emotional experience both for you and for your audience because it reflects the entirety of the human emotional spectrum. So best of luck to you as you work on ages.